welcome to the White Witch podcast with me, Carly. Hope you are all well, witches. On today's episode, I am joined by the author of Beyond Ayahuasca, Roman Hanis. I'm so excited to finally talk about ayahuasca on the podcast. It has long been a topic I've wanted to get into, and it really was a case of finding the right person to have on to talk about this. It did take me a long time to come across someone that felt right, and it happened very organically with stumbling across Roman's book, reaching out to him, and the subsequent conversations that followed. As a witch, I've always been fascinated with plants and their medicine. I myself have worked with herbalists, especially with issues regarding my mental health and so on. And naturally, this gave me a curiosity with looking at ayahuasca and other psychedelics. I'm still very much in the investigative stages when it comes to ayahuasca, as I do not underestimate its power. I'm still unsure if I'm even ready for the preparation leading up to ayahuasca. So it's not an imminent experience I necessarily wish to have, but it's high on my life's bucket list. This episode isn't just about ayahuasca either. Roman is incredibly philosophical, as his book demonstrates, and we really get into that within this conversation. It's not just an episode for us witches who want to experience ayahuasca. I'm sure you will find some other aspects here that might resonate for you relating to healing and so on. Having this conversation really took me out of my comfort zone in regards to topics for the podcast, but I enjoyed it so much, and I'm intent on bringing more different conversations, I guess, like this to the show. So without further ado, join me after the break for a conversation with the amazing Roman Hanis about ayahuasca. I am here with Roman Hanis, the co-founder of the Patiti Institute, healer and author with over 20 years of lived apprenticeship in Amazonian and Andean indigenous traditions. He has worked closely with indigenous communities in Peru since 2001, cultivating long-term relationships grounded in reciprocity, service, cultural preservation, and ecological restoration. Roman was featured in the critically acclaimed documentary The Sacred Science in 2010, which documented early cross-cultural healing work in the Amazon. Through Patiti Institute, Roman helps steward ancestral schools, cultural heritage projects, and healing retreats that unite elders and children and support intergenerational transmission of wisdom in the Amazon and the Andes. He is the author of the amazing book, Beyond Ayahuasca, an international bestseller in shamanism dedicated to the Amazonian Yahiwa nation, which proceeds directly supporting their ancestral school and cultural initiatives. He is a certified traditional Chinese medicine practitioner in Peru, trained in acupuncture, under the direction of Miriam Hacker at the Open International Institute of Oriental Medicine. He also holds a degree in medical massage therapy and Eastern bodywork from the Swedish Institute of Health Sciences. After being healed from severe Crohn's disease in 2002, Roman was formally pledged as a healer curandero in 2004 by elders of the Yahiwa tribe. He has since served an international community through ceremonial work, retreats, and educational programs addressing healing on physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual levels. At the heart of his work is a commitment to restoring right relationship between human beings, ancestral wisdom, and the living earth. Wow, Roman, welcome to the show.
So good to be here together with you, Carly, and with your audience.
I had to read your bio out because there is so much that you've done. There is so much knowledge that you have. And I feel so honored to get to have you on the show and get to talk to you all about this. So thank you ever so much for coming on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and I'm also really happy to connect with you and with the work that you're doing with the medicinal plants and the traditions and the ceremonies from different cultures. I understand that you work a lot with the European plant medicine traditions.
Yes, I guess for me, it's more, I work with them more through work that I do with, spell work, putting together candles and looking at their story and so on. And we talk a lot on the podcast about that. And I guess that definitely took me down the interest of ayahuasca. I've been looking into it as a ceremony that I'm, in my lifetime. It's one of the biggest things on my bucket list that I want to go and do. But I'm very conscious of taking it very seriously, researching, looking into it, and making sure that I'm in the right place to do it. So that's why I bought your amazing book, Beyond Ayahuasca. And it's something that I said on the book review that I did. I think one of the key things that is so important for a lot of people when they're looking into ayahuasca, and you even referenced this at the beginning of your book when you reached Peru and you were looking for, the right shaman, the right healer to work with. I think it is that trust and that resonating with the person or, who you're going to be doing this with. And I honestly can say, after reading the book, I would trust you with my firstborn child, let alone in a ayahuasca ceremony. So I just genuinely felt that, the authenticity from you, you can really sense your heart, your soul, and the message that you give in the book. And I just think that was one of the things that really kind of switched me onto your work. I think that a lot of witches are fascinated by ayahuasca, but again, as you had referenced, it's finding the right people and place to be part of it, to be part of one of those ceremonies.
Mm. Yeah, thank you kindly. I am really grateful for you expressing your trust. I don't take it lightly. And actually, when people express their trust, that means that I have to be so much more dedicated and supportive of the people that actually share that trust with me. So that's very meaningful that you share it with me in that way. And then, of course, it's so essential to develop a meaningful relationship. These traditions, they're not about a show or just having an exotic experience and someone to perform it, but it's actually based on genuine relationships that are cultivated with real people. And that's the most important facet of these traditions because, especially with ayahuasca, that is known to be also preparation for death, so it can simulate sometimes experiences that feel very much like real dying. And then in those moments, having someone that you trust that can guide you through those experiences, it's invaluable, right? It's so essential to establish that before the ceremony takes place.
And that's something that you had an experience of when obviously you first did this. And when I guess when you worked with Don Cinci as well, like that was the same nature of the relationship that you had, I guess.
Yeah, the elders that Don Cinci is representing, right? Because he's the only thing that is fictional about this book. The book is based on a real life story, but in order to make it more clear and coherent, I've collected all of the best qualities that I've met in many elders across the rainforest over the years that I've been there, and then created this fictional character of Don Cinci. And so, yeah, definitely the elders that I was able to go through this deeper, profound awakening experiences with, they were the ones that I had to develop firsthand, beforehand, a real relationship, a real friendship with, just seeing them as real human beings, not putting them on a pedestal that had faced much greater adversity than I have in my life. And then were able to guide me through my own shadow work that I had to do.
I loved how the book was written. I loved how, I mean, I just felt like I was out in the Amazon. I felt like I was there. It just got me thinking in such a different way. It really did make me start to realize. I think we go through times when we realize that we're being far too logical, we're far too tied into the matrix. It kind of just got me thinking, come on, Carly, come back to possibility, more about symbolism, more about looking at the the bigger picture of life. And I think that was the beauty of Beyond Ayahuasca. It took me out of thinking in a logical, it just kind of got me thinking on some really big, deep questions that I had for myself and life, and where I wanted, what I wanted to do. It wasn't just about ayahuasca by the end of the book. There were so many other messages that came through, so many other mindset changes it gave to me. I even said to you before we started, it's inspired episodes that I did of the podcast with the stories that were told, such as the Seven Sisters. So anyone reading this, it's so much more than just this is an ayahuasca ceremony. There is just so much in regards to love, life, and everything.
Yeah, that's really the perspective that has been shared with me, that the point of ayahuasca is for us to be able to see her as a miniature map of our own daily existence, and then see how our life itself is a ceremony, although most of the time unconscious, but it's always being guided and being led by the Great Spirit if only we start listening and being receptive enough, get out of our own heads and the different stories and the soap operas
Yeah.
that run in them.
We've kind of tapped into this a little bit already, but I'm going to ask you this in case there's anything I've missed. So, what was the moment that made you realize ayahuasca was not the end of the journey, that something more was needed beyond the ceremony itself?
Well, I initially came into the Amazon rainforest. I came, when already I had time to explore the psychedelic culture, where it is mostly about sensationalized experiences, and then no integration afterwards, and big gaps through which all of this awakened insights and enlightened experiences, they start to leak from. And so that was my experience when I came into the rainforest. I was looking for the depth of the tradition and the continuity of it that goes beyond just an experience. And yeah, I've had very profound, powerful awakening experiences with psychedelics early on in my life, in my early 20s and even late teens when I just began. And I would feel like I would just experience this um, beautiful states of mind and consciousness, and then I would feel like a fallen angel afterwards, because I would come back into my usual personality and character that had so many shortcomings and so many flaws where my energy would leak. And so I started realizing slowly that I needed an ancestral wisdom tradition that has experiences such as I was having, and then knows how to bring them into the continuity of our lives. And that was the reason why I went into the Amazon rainforest initially, because I did hit a ceiling at a certain point with my own individual explorations and spiritual studies, and I felt like a lineage was essential at that time in my life.
we've kind of touched on this for the next thing I wanted to ask you, but before writing Beyond Ayahuasca, you referenced, kind of other psychedelics and so on. What did you feel was missing from the mainstream psychedelic conversation?
Well, one of the things that was missing was this mind-body connection. The psychedelics, they often work with the mind, but leave the body disconnected from the experience. And so then the body, within the sacred plant medicine traditions, it's very integrated into the process, and it's actually about learning and realizing the wisdom of our organism, becoming more intuitive and noticing the subtle flow of energy within our organism. So then the body and the mind, they start to become more aligned. And this is something that I've also seen in the Eastern spirituality, for example, where people work so much with their consciousness and with their mind, and then you go into their cupboard or into those spiritual centers, right, where people are meditating, and you go into the cupboard in the kitchen and it's just stacked with pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
And so the mind and the body is often very disconnected, where in the sacred plant medicine traditions, they're very much interwoven together, and then it's possible to actually resolve the issues within the physical body through the working of consciousness, and then also vice versa, to start tuning in into the subtle messages of our organism, and then realize how it ties in into the higher purpose of our lives. So then that was something that I saw that was very missing in today, both psychedelic culture and also in many spiritual traditions, where the body is taken out of the equation, and the body can support us so much through its intuitive wisdom. And the healers, the elders in the rainforest that I worked with, they were able to guide me in that regard.
I just wanted to unpack a few things that you said there, because I wonder if you can relate to this. But I think one thing I see a lot of with, I guess, spiritual seekers, witches, people fascinated by topics like this, is a lot of us can be far too in our minds than we are in our body. That can be
Mm-hmm.
quite quite a thing that I often see, where, there's a lot of research going on. There's lots of things that we're reading. And I was privy to this myself for a long time. And I found myself very disconnected from my body. And, a few years ago, I started to kind of connect the dots and realize that they weren't working together. My body was like complete. I felt so removed from it. And I think that, even on a ground level like basic level, just trying to, as much work as you're doing on the mind, doing the same on your body, be that moving, touching grass, grounding, whatever it is. And I guess probably what brought me to the ayahuasca interest was having huge like addiction issues and mental health issues in the past. I remember that I didn't feel it was going to be an option to go to the doctors and start on, like, antidepressants or anything like that. That was a personal choice. I'd tried it before. I felt like I was in my body when I sort of taken whatever I was prescribed, but it was just masking everything. I was still in there suffering, yet what I'd been given didn't change anything for me. It kind of made me feel more disconnected from myself. And I guess like what brought me to the ayahuasca interest was my mum suggesting to work with a herbalist, and initially me thinking, I don't know if a herbalist is going to be able to do much, and which is crazy, because if you think about the effects of drugs that can be made from from plants, what we know of ayahuasca and so on, I was very naive. And I definitely agree with you. Like, the mind body connection is massively important. But I even think, kind of along the lines of the books, like, there are ways that we can do this on a basic level as well, let alone just getting into psychedelics and so on?
Yeah, because essentially the psychedelics or sacred plants, they will amplify whatever tendencies we already have in our lives, whatever predispositions. And so that's why in these traditions, the foundation is so essential to develop a basic foundation of training the mind to abide in the heart, to abide in the body, rather than just run off on tangents. And in transpersonal psychology, there is a term suppressed emotions, right? Suppressed emotional content. But where does it actually get suppressed? It all gets suppressed in the body. And then the body tends to carry all of those unprocessed emotional experiences we have in our lives, and the body is really good with it up to a certain point. Right?
Yeah.
The body can carry it for a long time until it starts to break down, which is also a wake-up call in our lives. To start listening to all of these issues that we are avoiding, that we have been bypassing in our lives, and then at a certain point there is this kind of emergency bell that starts ringing. And that's why in these ancient traditions the sicknesses, they're not considered to be an enemy, but they are seen to be as these strict mothers that are encouraging us to become, to grow up, to develop, to evolve ourselves. I apologize. I have dogs outside here. They want to come in.
That's okay. No, it's fine. I wanted to ask you how your own relationship with plant medicine changed as you moved away from seeking peak experiences and toward like the integration and embodiment.
Mm-hmm. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, the peak experiences initially in my life, as I mentioned, they were quite a revelation, right? It also had an essential part in my journey where initially I was just so deeply asleep and so blind to the greater experience of life, living in a very narrow tunnel vision kind of limited mundane experience. And so then I started to have glimpses of this entire universe that I didn't even know existed. And also this initial memories of myself beyond the conditioning of my life, before the conditioning started to unfold. And initially they were very intuitive glimpses, and it was just it was like becoming aware of something that I didn't even know that I forgot, but it was so profound and so valuable. It was more meaningful than anything else that existed in my life. And so when I first had those glimpses, I was quite in awe of that. And then in comparison to those glimpses, nothing in my life equated to that, right? So, um, so then I started to savor and treasure those experiences, and yet that's all they were. They were experiences. They didn't have a continuity to them, and I tried to grasp onto them. And the more I was grasping, the more they were evading me, and then I felt like that fallen angel, as I mentioned to you, falling from grace every time and feeling so miserable. And so then I started to recognize that integration was so essential, because I couldn't live like that anymore with long periods of dim awareness and then very short bursts of bright light of consciousness. And then I started to look for ways, and I started to study the transpersonal psychology by Carl Jung, and Eastern philosophy, Buddhist psychology as well, and Northern Native American traditions initially. And then that brought me into the Southern Native American traditions, both in the Andes and in the Amazon, where I was able to experience a full remission from the sickness that I had. I was able to heal it within 8 months of me coming to these traditions because there was a continuity, because I could integrate the experience throughout my everyday life rather than having some kind of a weekend warrior peak experience and then not be able to maintain it. But because I became woven into the fabric of society here in South America, into the culture, I started to tap into the state of being that the indigenous people were cultivating continuously, which is something I haven't witnessed beforehand in the Western world.
Hmm.
And even within the Eastern spiritual disciplines, yeah, I see people go to retreats and do meditations and vipassana and whatnot, and immerse themselves in this context of these traditions, but then there is nothing to connect with in everyday life. And then the habitual patterns, they take over again once going back. And so then I was so grateful to see that it is not something that is based on posturing or maintaining an image of spirituality, but it's earth-based spirituality. It's something that is based on everyday life and how people are, and they don't maintain an image or appearance or a certain particular form, whether it's meditation or anything else. But it's just so natural and spontaneous. And so that was very essential for me to see.
I really loved how you talked about coming to the root of where you felt that your Crohn's disease began, like when you went into stories of your childhood and things like that. And there was such a vulnerability in it. And I think for anyone that might have something going, something health wise, it really did highlight looking at, the body holds the score and bringing you back to that. So those parts of the book I found really beautiful, like, really vulnerable, and got, I think can get anyone thinking to bring it back to the root. And I think you're right. I love the fallen angel concept as well. And, you know, that you were now in this position where there was more you could do with it. There were more things that you could do in, because it is difficult when you've had an experience like that. And again, I've not done ayahuasca, but there's other things that I've, been to and done spiritually. And you come away with all the energy in the world and you're so inspired and passionate. But then, a few months down the line, you're back in the trenches of life. And it's kind of, what can you take away from that? So yes, I think that that's a really important thing to have, to work with afterwards. I guess that brings me to ask you in regards to people going for ceremonies. Have you witnessed people chasing ceremony after ceremony? And how can people tell the difference between a sense of like a genuine calling and spiritual bypassing?
Well, the spiritual bypassing is based on an image. It's based
Mhm.
on me wanting to resolve everything in my life, just take a magical pill and have this experience of bliss, and then never needing to deal with issues ever again. And I'm just gonna
Mhm.
reach a certain state and I'm gonna sit on a white cloud and float on it, and there's no more work that needs to be done.
Mhm.
And so the spiritual bypassing is based on comfort. It's based on maintaining some kind of an illusory control and a sense of comfort, where the real work takes us beyond that. It takes us beyond the comfort zone and shows us that the control we think we have in our lives is illusory. And it's something that necessitates growth, inner growth, and cultivating greater resiliency in the midst of difficult circumstances of our lives. And so, in these traditions, I often share how there is no magical trick to them. And you can learn all the tricks in the world, and you can have thousands of ceremonies, but it's not really the quantity, but the quality that matters. And so with that, honesty is the most essential ingredient. Nothing can substitute it. So self-honesty, where am I running away from myself? And it's up to each one of us to answer that question. And then am I willing to actually come to terms with myself and get real in my life and no longer fool myself, because I'm fooling myself first and foremost. And so those are the most essential questions I find on this path that help avoid the spiritual bypassing.
What would you say are some signs that someone needs grounding and containment rather than another medicine journey?
Mm. Well, something that my teachers have shared with me is that experiences come and go, right? So if I'm just chasing experiences, it's going to be very fleeting and meaningless in my life in the long term. And so the most essential in these traditions is the attitude. That's the only thing that I can take away from these traditions. Because yeah, I can have an afterglow with the medicine work, but then it wanes. And then what is left afterwards? What is my attitude towards life? Am I resisting life? Am I getting upset and blame everything and everyone for me being miserable? Or do I take responsibility for my life and begin to change my attitude towards it? And so these lineages, these traditions, they help to instill this, so to speak, enlightened attitude towards life. In other traditions, I've heard it being referred to as this mood of the peaceful warrior, for example. And so then I come after the ceremony into my everyday life, and then rather than being resentful of not experiencing a certain blissful state or whatnot, then how do I work with my disturbing emotions? And how do I engage with people and with situations? And of course, if I'm bitter and upset and constantly get irritated and frustrated with everything and everyone, then yeah, there is inner work that needs to be done, then that the ceremonies may not be able to compensate for. And that is the foundation of mind training that I mentioned, is how can I take responsibility? And of course, it's inevitable that I will get upset and irritated and frustrated. It's not about judging and beating oneself up either, but it's whether I'm willing to actually be accountable for that and start to see that it's not just the ceremonies that I am dependent on, but how can I cultivate a more steady practice that allows me to become an actual human being within a human body.
I loved with your book because it's kind of some of the things that you're bringing up brings me back to at the end of chapters. There were some wonderful journal prompts to work on that I started working, that I was working through. And I think for anybody who is perhaps considering doing a ceremony or, has an interest in this, it got me thinking about there was so much through the book that you could kind of unpack already, that would kind of get you ready for this if it felt like still the path for you. So, yeah, I felt like that was a wonderful side of the book. We talk about shadow work a lot on the podcast. You've referenced it already. It really did get me working through some different things that you brought up within the book. So I really liked that aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the three realms of existence within the indigenous cosmovision that are essential for healthy life is the shadow realm. And without facing our own shadows, we cannot relate genuinely to the difficulties of other people and then develop compassion. Then once we develop that, then we come into the realm of everyday existence, where we learn how to work together, how to collaborate, and how to make this world a better place, have a shelter over our head, and food for our families to eat, and community to gather in, and plant and harvest. And then through that shared work, that only through the shadow realm we can come into genuine connection with others, then we can learn about the higher qualities of others, the gifts, the talents, the skills that we can rejoice seeing in others, for ourselves being able to see in others. And then we can start to cultivate those talents and skills within ourselves. And so it's these three realms of existence that are woven together in the indigenous cosmovision. It's the shadow realm, the realm of everyday existence, and the realm of enlightened ancestors. And that is parallel to the transpersonal psychology view of the personal unconscious, the everyday conscious, and the superconscious.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more in regards to ego. We started to, you've referenced that a few times in regards to this. I wanted to ask you, right, about the importance of humility on the path. But how does ego subtly re-enter spiritual work even after powerful plant medicine experiences?
Well, the ego tends to adapt to the
Mhm.
spiritual path, and sometimes I may have this an egoless experience in the ceremony where I die, my superficial sense of self releases finally, and I surrender into this unconditional nature of existence, and have this very profound shaking experience that makes me reevaluate my entire life. And then the ceremony ends, and then the next day the ego develops in a new way where it starts to wear a spiritual medal. Look, I had this experience where I lost myself, and now I can be proud of that experience, and I can show off to others and tell others how I have become enlightened and I have lost my ego. And then the ego becomes stronger than ever, right? So the
Yeah.
ego tends to reconstitute itself quite fast. And in these traditions, it's not about destroying the ego. The ego is not the
Mhm.
enemy.
Yeah.
And this is something that people often have misconceptions about. I guess through some superficial studies of Eastern spirituality that talk about no ego, but actually they don't mean it the way that we interpret it with our Western consciousness. And
Yeah.
so in these
Yeah.
traditions, the ego is not the enemy. The ego is part of our life. Without the ego, we wouldn't be able to talk or walk or
Mhm.
do the most basic life functions. However, the ego is not the center of the universe. It's not the most important thing that we have in our lives. And so in these traditions, when the ego thinks that it's the most important, that is the problem, and then the ego needs to be deconditioned. So instead of the ego being a capricious master, it needs to be taught how to be a humble servant of the greater organism. As a capricious master, the ego is never satisfied, and it needs to go through more and more intricate ways to entertain itself or have instant gratifications, and it's never enough. There's always something for the conditioned ego. And so then the being a humble servant actually is very fulfilling for the ego, because there is a higher purpose that one can wholeheartedly stand for and dedicate oneself to, and then that actually brings timeless happiness to the ego once it becomes humble enough to express the natural qualities of the organism rather than be capricious enough to distort them and then cause all kinds of problems in their lives.
Do you think psychedelics can accelerate spiritual development, Or do they simply reveal what still needs to be lived?
Well, psychedelics, just in and of themselves, I think they can just amplify the spiritual neurosis, maybe.
Hmm.
But the living wisdom traditions that work with psychoactive substances, like the plant medicines, for example. And I know that there is quite a bit also of psychedelic use within the modern Buddhist tradition. And I have seen some benefit to that, where it's not just the psychedelics themselves or the sacred plant medicines, but they are utilized as instruments, as skillful means within a lineage of consciousness. And so then when people actually have the inner discipline, the inner training, then as a skillful mean, as an instrument, when utilized meaningfully, then it can definitely save a lot of meaningless hamster wheels in
Hmm.
our lives. I've had people who were, for example, very serious practitioners in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. I had this one scholar, he was 40 years he was practicing and studying, and he knew huge volumes of ancient scriptures by heart. And after the first ayahuasca ceremony with me, he came to me in the morning with this big, you know, awe-stricken eyes, and he told me, he said, I've been practicing for 40 years, and last night was the first time ever in my life that I have realized what compassion is like. And
Wow.
so, and so, of course, when people are prepared, right? And then, of course, I have people that come with no preparation and no foundation, and then they dismiss the experiences they have because there is no context for them. So then, yeah, just psychedelics or plant medicines in and of themselves, yeah, they may create a relative experience that is more superficial, but people who have done the work, who have practiced in their own lives, who have done the preparation, then they have very profound revelation experiences that allow them to deepen the practice that they are already implementing in their lives.
I think when I've looked at ayahuasca and like researched the preparation for it and so on, it has hit me that even that in itself, before you even touch that, you even drink anything, is a huge, change in itself. Like that, there's a lot that can come from the preparation alone, let alone, drinking ayahuasca.
Very much so. Of course, traditionally, before people would drink ayahuasca, I mean, in the indigenous traditions, from the time that we are children, we are raised within that cultural context. And the storytelling is considered to be just as powerful, if not more, of a medicine than the actual ingestion of a plant.
Mm.
And then there are different practices and reflections on the hero's journey within one's own life. And then having that blueprint of inner transformation before embarking on a plant medicine ceremony. Within the indigenous traditions, it's instrumental. There has to be that foundation. And of course, before working with the plant, there's also the dieta that takes place both with food, where we eat very strict foods that entail no sugar, no salt, no spicy, nothing of a flavor, just eating green boiled plantains and very bland. There's one type of fish in the Amazon that is allowed for dieta. It's a vegetarian fish with thousands of bones, and it's a meditation just to eat this fish. You can spend an hour very deliberately picking out those thousands of bones out of it and not much substance. And so there are all of these practices with food, but then also with one's own life, embarking on a spiritual dieta, where not having intimate relationships for 3 days, at least 3 days before, and reflecting on one's life, spending time in silence, in contemplation, and starting to listen to one's dreams, and recognizing the language of appearances of our life experiences that is woven throughout the story of our lives. And so all of that is so essential and is a very meaningful preparation for plant medicine experiences, so that we can actually bring it back into our lives, so that it's not something that is disconnected, where I'm just catapulted into the farthest corner of the universe, and then there is no bridge for me to actually implement and integrate it into daily life.
I wanted to ask you, when you initially went out all those years ago to Peru to obviously go out and, find a healer that you could work with, did you have any inkling that this would be your life? Like this would be where you are now? This would be part of your work and so on?
No, no, I had no idea. And yeah, I never wanted to become a healer. I never wanted to become a shaman. I know
Mm.
nowadays people have this kind of ideas where it's possible to just escape everyday life responsibilities and just go and become a wizard, living somewhere on top of a mountain and not needing to engage with life. But for me, I just wanted to heal the illness that I had and become normal, so to speak, which was again my own illusion. And I never wanted to become anything else. And actually, after 3 years of apprenticeship, my elders at that time, they became very serious with me, and they told me, okay, now you've studied all of this spiritual traditions and approaches, and now it's time for you to actually go back to wherever you escaped from, go back to society and get a job. That was their guidance. And so they
Wow.
wanted to make sure that I'm not on this path as a way of escaping from my
Mm,
everyday life. And so I had to go back, and I have escaped initially from a corporate job that I had
mm,
in society, and I didn't believe with the superficial values of our modern society, and I have escaped. And then my elders told me that I have to go and face everything that I have escaped from. I had to go back and get a job in the corporate world once again after 3 years of apprenticeship, just to make sure that I'm not avoiding anything, I'm not escaping, I'm not running away, and I'm able to complete everything in a good way, so that I can actually wholeheartedly step into this path.
wow, that must have been so, because I guess, if you look back at who you were when you first went out to Peru, when you first embarked on that journey, it must have felt like a life in a life compared to where you were and what you were doing. It must have been, I think it's incredibly brave, like to have gone, that whole experience of going back and returning to that life must have been massive.
Yeah, definitely. That was I when I finished my 3 years of apprenticeship, and I went back to New York after that, which is where I came from initially, and that was one of the more difficult times in my life. I felt like I was having something that I refer to as the Mowgli syndrome, where I just came from a jungle, from the rainforest, where I lived in a hut that had no walls. It was
Mm.
just completely open. And I came back into New York, and I had to move in with my parents, and they never thought that I'm gonna come back. And so they got themselves a very tiny apartment. and they only had a walk-in closet for me that had no windows. And so from a life with no walls, I was completely shut down in the place that didn't even have windows. And the first year I was hiding, there was this kind of post-apocalyptic swamp reserve next to my parents' place in Brooklyn. And
Mm.
the first year I was pretty much there most of the time.
It sounds like you were like Harry Potter, like in the cupboard under the stairs for a little
Yes,
while.
yes, yeah, very much so.
Oh, I really loved the part of the book where you asked to help with the preparation of the mother plant of ayahuasca. And at first I think they were like, you can't come yet because, we'll like kind of bump into a snake and it'll all go wrong and you're not, it's not the time. And then later on you got to come out and you went through all of the whole process of preparing the plant and so on. And I really loved that story, and also all the insight into all the preparation itself. And I was really taken aback by how intricate it was.
Mm. Yeah, there is a lot of preparation in these traditions to engage with the plant medicine in a more intentional and honorable way. And of course, the plant medicine also is a symbol of our own inner medicine, of the mother nature within ourselves. And so it's essential to prepare and purify oneself of all of the superficial tendencies and the arrogance of the ego before connecting so intimately with the sacred power of nature and our heart.
So, one thing I really wanted to ask you is, what question do you wish people asked themselves before sitting with ayahuasca, but very rarely do?
Well, the question, of course, it's going to be somewhat different for each person, but the main theme should be how it relates to one's everyday life.
Mm.
And being honest with oneself about the challenges that one is having, the personal issues, all of the covers that need to be blown in one's own life, because ayahuasca, she's a teacher plant, and so
Mm.
she will show us often what we don't like to see in ourselves, what we're avoiding, what we're sweeping under the carpet. And so the earlier that we can ask that question of ourselves and actually start working with that, then the more graceful the experience with the plant medicine will be. Because the plant medicine, one of the reasons that I'm so grateful to the plant medicine is that it's very humbling.
Yeah.
And so then if I can start to humble myself beforehand, then that will be very supportive of the healing journey.
Has writing this book changed your relationship with the medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. Writing this book, over the 2 decades I've been writing this book. I started writing it in 2008 and was preparing to write it for years beforehand. And so then starting to write it has enabled me to connect many, many dots within my own path and journey. And so it was, in a way, this weaving of my journey, bringing into focal point all of the insights, realizations, and recognizing the continuity, because sometimes it's not so easy to see the progress on the spiritual path. Only
Mhm.
after a long time, but sometimes even years later, I would look back into my life and and think, well, I'm still dealing with similar issues and patterns, and I keep coming back to that. And then writing the book has allowed me to recognize that actually I haven't been going in circles, but it's kind of like a spiral of
Mm-hmm.
transformation. Where, yes, I go to the same issues in my life over the course of my spiritual journey, but I go into those issues on a deeper curve of the spiral. I keep getting more and more into the roots of those issues. And then, of course, like a spring, then at a certain point, I go deeper into the root, and then I'm able to go up into the heights of my potential and recognize the degree of evolution that has unfolded. And so writing the book has been that journey for me. It's been a very profound process. And not only writing it, but then editing the book was also very magical, where I took 3 years where I did a beta testing and I sent about 30 copies of my book to people within our community, and then just having them as a mirror to my own experience, and then reflections with things that needed to be unpacked more, and that was also very magical and very transformative.
Before, I've got obviously still loads of things I'd like to ask you still, but is there anything you want to share with us in regards to how the book has been received, or any other work that you're doing as a result of publishing Beyond Ayahuasca?
Well, I'm very grateful that the book was received so well. I wasn't really writing it so much for it to become a bestseller, and it's been a great blessing to see that the book has become an international bestseller in shamanism on Amazon, and and again, a total surprise, because I was just putting my heart into this book. It was my own also practice of integration, as you mentioned, and then of course, yes, seeing how what was so meaningful to me and was so revelational can be supportive to people within our community, and I can be in service, which again is so fulfilling in my life. That's been the greatest joy, is to actually be in service to the people awakening themselves to the greater meaning and fulfillment and purpose of their own life. And actually, I've been writing it continuously, and it was too big to be published as one book, and I split it into several books. But it's all been something that I've been writing over the years continuously, and so there is the second series that are coming, that I'm getting ready to be published this year, and I'm finalizing it right now. And the second book is actually about the master plant
Mm-hmm.
dieta, which is a
Mm-hmm.
deeper facet of the ayahuasca tradition, and also in relation to it's not just ayahuasca, but there is also this very profound tradition of plant medicine diets within the Amazon rainforest,
Mm-hmm.
where people diet with many different plants, some of them more psychoactive, some of them less, but the plant medicines themselves through the rainforest, they represent the different awakened qualities of Mother Nature. And so, if there is greater receptivity within one's being that is developed through the work with ayahuasca and humility, then it's possible to actually cultivate essential human qualities and learning from other plant medicines. And so then ayahuasca, she's the mother of all plants, and she connects us to the wisdom of all plant medicines, even simple plants that we take for granted, such as sage or chamomile and things like that. And ayahuasca helps us to start to see the wisdom within those plants, and how this wisdom is related to us through the qualities that we can apply and cultivate. And so through the work with the ayahuasca tradition, then I can start seeing that I'm confused, for example. And that's the first step to develop clarity in life when I'm confused, is to at least become clear that I'm confused. It's that first seed of clarity that is planted. Or if I'm, for example, uh, afraid, or I have irritation or anger issues, and I can admit to that, and I can begin to honestly work with that in my own life, then plant medicines, they can actually help me with that. Otherwise, of course, it just becomes another band-aid. But if I
Mm-hmm.
can be honest in my life, then I can embark on the plant medicine dieta. And the second book goes more deeply into that. It's dedicated to a very powerful healing plant in the rainforest called Chirisanango. And that plant is teaching us about fierce innocence and also the trickery of the mind. So the second book is dedicated to the trickster archetype. And in
I
the
love
Amazon
this.
tradition, the healer is the trickster
Mm-hmm.
because the conditioned ego needs to be tricked into
Mm-hmm.
letting go of conditioning.
I've heard of that within soul retrieval that
Mhm.
shamans will perform. That's really interesting. Well, hopefully you might consider this, Roman, but when you come to releasing this book, your second offering, I would love to have you on again if you'd be happy to talk about it, because this sounds absolutely fascinating and I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the intention for me was to write the book not just as a dry technical account, but to write it as a riveting adventure novel
Hmm.
where the reader gets to experience everything from a first person perspective. And so the first book, I started with that, and it sets the stage, right, for that adventure, for the transformation to take place. And then the second book takes it to the next level where it's um, this one continuous adventure that takes place through the inner and outer landscapes, learning how to navigate the trickery of the mind.
That was what I loved about the book, is it's so immersive. Like you feel like you're there. You even get descriptions of the sounds you can hear, the animals you saw. Excuse me. It was just incredibly immersive and I loved that. And it just did feel like you were part of the journey. You were, there like a fly on the wall, listening into conversations and so on. So that was such a beautiful way that it was written. And I really resonated with that. So you touched on fear, and I wanted to ask you, for someone feeling called to ayahuasca but also afraid, what would you want them to hear?
Well, ayahuasca, she is, she has an innate intelligence to her, and again, if it's done within the proper context, within the traditional setting, and with people that one can trust and relate to, with the healer or the facilitator. So that is so essential. And then, of course, the fear is of the unknown. So that's what the fear is coming from. It's from confusion. And so then, yeah, I would like people to know that in these traditions, ayahuasca is known to be a sacred plant medicine because it has helped countless people through many, many generations. And in the rainforest, people have reverence towards ayahuasca, and they have this inherent trust in Mother Nature. And that is something that in the Western culture we have forgotten, that it's essential to trust Mother Nature. And then it's essential to see ayahuasca not as a psychedelic or some kind of a substance, but as something that is sacred, something that is coming from these ancient traditions and is known to be sacred because it's benevolent, because she has been healing people and helping people come back to themselves. And so, yeah, I would like people to know that there is a greater context in these traditions, and it's not just about having some kind of a show or tripping, but it's actually it's not even having an experience with ayahuasca, but it's about allowing ayahuasca to get to know you. And so, yeah, there is a certain reverence and respect towards the tradition that is essential for people to cultivate so that they can go through it in the most beneficial way.
If Beyond Ayahuasca could leave listeners with one truth about healing, what would it be?
Mm, yeah, that's a good one. So if Beyond Ayahuasca could leave people with one truth about healing, I think the main point is that consciousness is the main healing agent. And everything can support consciousness on its journey, but nothing can substitute it. And so the healing power is within each individual. And so, yeah, I think that would be it.
Wow, this is honestly, this has come to the end of all my questions, but I did want to ask you, Roman. My brain is just kind of going like this has been magical. I've been immersed in everything that you've been saying. I wanted to ask you, is there anything you wish to add to this conversation or anything you'd like to tell us about before we wrap up this time of getting to speak with each other?
Well, I can just add that essentially the healing journey is a solitary journey because no one can do it for me. And at the same time, I am alone, but I'm not lonely. And so, in this process, sharing vulnerably with people over the years about this journey and being in service to the greater healing of the shared heart of humanity. And also through my book, I'm so grateful that I can share the aspects of this journey and people can feel related to that within themselves. And so then the way that I can help others is by doing the work within myself, and the way that others help me is by doing the work within themselves as well. And so in that way, we're all together in the journey. And I'm so grateful to collaborate with you and continue to weave this collective dream towards the awakening. And the more consciously we can co-create this shared dream of humanity, the more that we can make the world a better place. And so, yeah, um, I can leave it at that.
Roman, it's been absolutely amazing to have you on. I knew I would be looking forward to this after reading your book. So I'm incredibly grateful that you spent this time. So, yes, thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much, Carly, and thank you for doing your work. And yeah, I'm very inspired to keep learning about all the work that you're doing because, again, it's not just one way, and there are so many pathways to awakening of our unconditional qualities of being, the nature within ourselves. And then, yeah, I love to weave it and continue to do so.
Absolutely. Thank you.